All right, and we are live, folks. So I will go ahead and turn my camera off, but I will still be here if you need me for anything. So
Thank you, Meg.
Thank you.
Beth.
Ah, so in the participants list, we can see attendees joining.
I'll give it just another minute.
Oh, sure. Make sure everybody that hit the join button right on time. Wonderful, lots of people popping in. Hello, hello.
We'll give it just a minute here. We're not quite at 2:45 yet. Okay, I guess I'm going to get started. Good afternoon, everybody. On your screen, you should see our title screen, which indicates the presentation you're here to hear about, called Stretching the STEM Pipeline, Advancements Through Community Collaborations. My name is Beth Weller. I am from the Children's Museum in West Hartford, here in Connecticut. With me today presenting, I have a couple of my colleagues. First off, DeFeo. Joe was hired in 2017. He is our Senior Development Coordinator. Joe comes to us with a great background as a prior business owner. He has worked in the corporate world and also in the nonprofit world in a social welfare and advocacy organization. Here with us today is Dan Butterworth. Dan joined us in 2004. Dan has a background as a middle school science teacher, and he is currently our education coordinator, which is our lead education position here at the museum. And my name is Beth Weller. I have been here at the Children's Museum since 2001. I started as an educator, I've been in customer service, and took on the role of operations director in 2010. So just to give you a little background of those of us that are presenting today. Let me take you into our agenda, tell you a little bit about what we're going to present today. So we have a program that we're very proud of, and we wanted to use this program as an example of a community collaboration because we've worked hard to get to this point. So I've already introduced our presenters, but I'm going to take you through a little bit about the Children's Museum's history and our place in the community, because I think that's a key piece in understanding where we fit in our community. Tell you a little bit about what we call the Neighborhoods program and how it evolved. And that's the program, our 3-year program that we're here to tell you about. Joe's going to come in and talk a little bit about securing that financial support from the development end of things. And then, of course, no program is successful unless we have a great programmatic design and can facilitate that well. And Dan's going to come in and talk about that. And finally, we will end with a little bit about our evaluation process and where we hope to go in the future. Do feel free to pose some questions to us in the Hoover portal. We will attempt to answer those at the end of the session. So let me, we're going to go to our next screen. And I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about who we are, what our resources are that we offer to the community, and what our place is. You see some very dated pictures here. And that is because we are a 93-year-old institution. The Children's Museum here in West Hartford was established in 1927 We are actually the 5th oldest children's museum in the country, and we began in the city of Hartford before moving here to the suburbs in West Hartford in 1958. We actually have one of the oldest museum preschools, so early childhood education has been very important since our beginning. That was established in 1946, excuse me, and still in operation today. And our planetarium was actually built in 1968. That too is still in operation today. Let's fast forward to the second 50 years that we are almost at the tail end of. Things look a little bit different here nowadays. Back in 1973, Roaring Brook Nature Center in Canton, Connecticut was added to our institution. In 1976, for those of you that are familiar with our area of Connecticut or even have lived in Connecticut, probably know our museum because we're called the Museum with the Whale. Even if people don't recognize our name as the Children's Museum, they know us by the Museum with the Whale. Connie, our big life-size whale, was built in 1976. We have an animal sanctuary, a quite extensive animal sanctuary, and that was established in 1981. And more recently, as times have changed and we're reaching beyond our museum walls, we've gone virtual with what we call the Connecticut Wildlife Center. And that's a virtual outreach that unites both our sanctuary at the museum and our nature center. And then lastly, we are currently anticipating a move to a new location. We actually have our eyes set on a return to Hartford, the city of Hartford, and ideally not far from where we started. So we're really excited about that. So knowing our background a little bit, what our resources are, let me tell you a little bit about this neighborhoods program and how it evolved over time. So we had been working with political stakeholders, corporate stakeholders, social services organizations, philanthropic organizations to identify some of the challenges that the city of Hartford faces. And they are numerous. We know that the city of Hartford has a low per capita income, low academic performance has been a challenge, high unemployment rates. And this group of stakeholders has identified some key things that they feel need to happen to strengthen the city of Hartford, which include a well-educated workforce to be able to sustain that workforce, an above average level of STEM literacy. And there's also growing evidence that kind of STEM literacy, if initiated early in a child's development, is most successful. And that's been a big topic of discussion amongst our stakeholders. And finally, one of the most important things that have come out of these discussions is that to be most successful, the child's learning really needs to be supported by the family and by the community. And it's through these discussions that we've made connections with several community groups to begin a broad program, which we call the Neighborhoods Program. Now, the Neighborhoods Program is a series of STEAM and STEM hands-on programming opportunities. In this program, it is a 3-year program that we have been able to get funded. We are working on the final year now of funding. It includes 6 of the Hartford Library branches and 3 Hartford community centers. What's most important about these programs is they are repeat opportunities for the families within these community groups to participate. The programs are primarily in the community and not inside our walls of our museum. And that's a key piece we'll come back and talk about in a bit. The planning for this, the planning is done not just with upper level people weighing in. We don't just look at the people that are managing these centers, but we talk to the parents, and there's been focus groups of parents that have been involved so that we know that we are focusing on content and direction that works for them and that they're invested in. And we recognize that communication and language challenges need to be overcome. English is not always the first language of many of our adults that are participating, not so much the children, but certainly their parents and grandparents in many cases. Basic needs, including challenges with transportation, food insecurities and issues of providing food for these families are addressed in this program. And then lastly, this program includes a final wrap-up opportunity for these families once we've gone into their community and they've been the host, we've been their guests, for them to come out of their communities and be encouraged to step out and explore at our museum or in another location. So that's our the kind of the basics of that program. And I want to touch on, before I pass it on to Joe, a little bit about how this developed into what it is today, because it has taken a lot of time. For over 25 years, our museum has had a program we call SAFA. It's called Science Achievement for All. That's what that stands for. And it's really been focused on schools. And for a long time, that's really been our focus. Well over half of our earned revenue comes from education program. It's a huge piece of our focus and our mission, as well as our revenue that comes in. And we've really focused a lot on schools. And in identifying this family connection, and we started this really back as early as 2010 with discussions. We had a program called Family Science Sundays. It was very much bringing that STEM agenda that had really been brought to the forefront into programs that were done in our museum once a month. And we would bring a different community group from some of our more disadvantaged areas into the museum. We did that for several years, and then back in 2015 and 16, changed the focus a little bit. STEAM became a word that was introduced a lot more, and we really embraced STEAM, but we were still doing these same type of programs for families inside our museum. It really, we were challenged by it. It wasn't as successful as we would have liked it to be. It was challenging to bring these groups in, even offering them transportation and free admission. There was just a level of being uncomfortable coming into our museum outside of their communities. So in 2017, we started a 2-year pilot program where we worked with some of the Hartford libraries, and we went to them and worked with the same families for a week. And at the end of that week, they came here. That was met, that pilot program was met with such resounding success that we then really pushed forward, began working with our community centers as well, and created this 3-year plan where we now go out to the communities to deliver this program. And there's a lot of steps and a lot of communication we do. We began this last summer, and of course, COVID did stall it a little bit, but we have regrouped and changed a little bit of our delivery methods, working now virtually. And as we go, we have to evaluate the goals that we had set forth for this program. And I'm just going to end with just letting you know what a few of those goals were. So the overarching goal of this community collaboration was to get urban youth excited and comfortable and engaged in STEM related topics and activities. We really want to show measurable change in the number and frequency of children and families returning to participate. That's one of our goals, is return participation versus one-time, one-off programs. We want to continue to foster the interest of the libraries and the family centers. We need to stay within their mission and have them continue to want us to be part of that. We want to be able to attract financial support for this from organizations. And ultimately, we really hope that the programs that we create will encourage other urban areas to want to embrace and implement similar programs. So we know that there's some challenges we need to overcome. We know that these families often have limited financial means and transportation challenges. So we do address this in our grant. We also know that there's a level of comfort that they need to feel. They really need to be the hosts. We need to come into their area. They need to be comfortable with us. And over time, we then work to encourage them and their children to experience things outside of their community. And we also need to address those language issues. We do bring interns in that actually are from these centers to help us with that. So that is a piece of our program as well. And probably the biggest challenge, and it takes constant and consistent communication and dialogue with not only the partner leaders, but the families that are engaged. We need to mitigate any interest that if we see any waning interest, or if we see that their focuses have changed. We really need to keep that dialogue open. So with that, that gives you just a little bit of introduction of the program. I'm going to turn the dialogue over to Joe DeFeo, who's going to talk a little bit about the development end of things. And once we kind of have met with the stakeholders, what do we do from there?
Thanks, Beth. There's a lot that we do from there. And where that starts for me personally, one of the philosophies I have of fundraising and development is asking an essential question. And because we are in a state of collaboration consistently, that essential question spans across several different points and several different areas of what we do. I mean, the base essential question you say is, why do we do what we do? And you build from there as to how do we do what we do. And your essential question should be answered by action. How will that propel you to move forward? And how will that propel you to meet the goals that you want to meet? So that is where you start off your base. And when you have a strong base, you can only build up from there. And as you look for funding, you look at how the funding can be proper funding, how it can be ethical funding, how it can be funding that matches what not only your essential question is, but the overarching questions that and actions of your programs. And this is where fundraising and development becomes, because it's such a glamorous job, it becomes less glamorous because you have to go into a lot of research. You have to go into a lot of history of any potential candidates. You have to go into the background of a candidate. And it's a lot of research, and it's a lot of work to look at placement of your funding candidates, not only in your facility, but in the community at large. And you have to look at how you present to them. What are you bringing to them? How does it match up? You have an idea and you need to get it funded. It doesn't work the opposite way. You don't chase the money. When you have that core and you have that strong base, you know how to present because everything is built in for you already. So looking at where you get your candidate from, it could be someone internal, it could be a new funder that you haven't worked with before. And that's why it's so important to do the digging into who they are, their placement in the community and their placement in the business community at large, or if it's an individual, again, their history of how they've come to want to fund this particular level of interest, or if they haven't, how can you make them want to fund it? And that leads into an important point that Beth had brought up is collaboration. And if you look on that slide, you'll see our logo with a bunch of other logos, Hartford Public Libraries, Catholic Charities. and Connecticut Children's, which for those of you who are not in Connecticut, Connecticut Children's is full name is Connecticut Children's Medical Center. So you're looking at a collaboration between a lot of seemingly disparate organizations. And some of them may not make sense. Why would we partner up with a medical center if we're presenting educational STEAM and STEM programming? We'll get to that a little bit later and you'll see why. The other two are a fit. You know, Beth had said Hartford Public Libraries launched these pilot programs. They brought the community together. Catholic Charities, their family centers are touchstones in the community and the neighborhoods and places where people can come in and they're seen as a trusted asset for that particular community. So with that collaboration, you have to now match each other's goals and the means to an end. You have to work together, which in an ideal world, you're all working toward the same goal and you're all working on the same level to get there. And that's unique in a lot of different ways because you don't see this type of high-level collaboration with nonprofits. Nonprofits can be very protective and very secretive. And you have to make sure you're not stepping on anybody's toes. You have to make sure that there's no duplication of your efforts, that there's no crossing the line when it comes to attracting funders. And you may meet a lot of resistance in these kinds of things, and that's to be expected. Part of the fundraising element and development area is to make people comfortable with what you're doing, to make sure that you're not wasting your time and wasting your funders' time and your collaborative partners' time by duplicating efforts, by doing the same thing and chasing a goal that's not in the particular interest of the entire collaborative effort. So when we started off on this, we had to make sure there was a clear vision externally, but internally as well. We had to make sure that every department was in the loop along every step of the way. And it's very vital and important for development to be present and to be involved in the day-to-day details of these programmatics, of planning phases. It's not just, there's a terrible business saying you're breaking down the silos. And that's the best imagery I can think of, because you are a lot of times in nonprofits, but not only internally, but externally, every section has its own area and they don't want to cross over. But in this instance, you have to, because you have to make sure what you're doing makes sense. You have to make sure what you're doing is meeting the end goals and is proper funding. So we took a look, and you have to also know why you're doing what you're doing. You can ask yourself those essential questions, and that should lead you to look at the physicality of why you're doing what you're doing, particularly in this community. Hartford does not have a lot of the funding it needs in order to provide these kind of STEAM and STEM programs. The state has gone probably within the last 20 to 30 years through a real brain drain. And particularly Hartford has seen a lot of talent leaving the area and leaving the region. So what we're looking to do is these potential corporate funders, a lot of them have a STEAM pipeline, a lot of them have STEAM jobs, and a lot of them are very interested in promoting that, especially to younger children and families, to get them to stay in the area, build up not only the business, but build up the community. And then you can see that cycle of how starting off at a young age with these programs, you introduce this idea of rebuilding the community, of rebuilding the STEAM pipeline, and rebuilding what the strength of a local economy can mean. And it all starts with education. Part of the difficulty with this program was it was something new and something different, and it had not been done to this level before. We brought some programs in for a science night or for an animal display night, and it was a one-time event. And what we had to look at now is something that could be sustained. So you have now a few different moving parts. You have the collaborative efforts between the few different folks and groups, and you have the sustainability long-term of a program like this, and you have the sustainability of a program that's meeting multiple times across at least 1 year. In this instance, it was a 2 to 3 years. So you need to have some kind of funding that is strong enough to last that long. And if I can move on to the next slide, please. What I'm showing now is part of the application process. So you find your funder, you find a strong funder, and you want to make sure that you have good communication, not only with your collaborators, not only internally, but with your funders. And this is just the base page of our report that we did send out. And if I can go to the next slide. What a good funder will do is they will allow you to have this kind of a breakdown. They will allow you to have this kind of separation of what you need from them. And this will also help because it ties back to your collaboration where you're not duplicating efforts. If one group had a specific funder they thought would be interested, they're not asking for the same thing that we might be asking for from our funder. And then we can also get a look at what each other is asking for and what each other needs. And we might be able to fill in the gaps on each other's side. So this is a good breakdown. It's not filled in because it's just the template, but this is a good breakdown of what you would need to look at and the detail you need to get into in order to get that proper and succinct funding. And Dan, if I can go to the next slide, please. And what we ended up having to do was not only find a unique way to present this idea, because it was an absolutely different idea, we had to find a way to present it properly back to the funder. You always want to, in a development stance, have that in the back of the mind. How does this meet what we had told the funder? Does it meet the guidelines set forth by the funder? And does it meet the goals that we promised we could deliver? And there is an expectation of deliverables. There always is. It is an elephant in the room. And what you have to do is set the deliverables at the start. And in this particular, we're going to talk more about this a little later, but at the beginning of that process, you have to know what your funder is looking for, how you can provide it to them, and how you can reset or change a deliverable on something that's not a ethereal metric, something that is not a solid presentation that you can say, here is X amount of material. So we had to find creative ways to present that to our funders. And what you're going to see throughout this is, you may have already noticed, there's a little bit of overlap with the pictures that we've chosen. And that's a little bit on purpose, is because it's such a through line that you have to keep to make sense to your funders and to make sense to your collaborative partners, that it's important to have that strong through line for a story that you're going to deliver at the end of the day. So where that programming comes from, how we fit into that programming, that I'm going to turn over to Dan at this point.
All right. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, these are always interesting projects when we finally are successful with a grant application, and it kind of, we know that it's going to come to fruition now. And then this comes to me to sort of say, okay, now how are we actually going to make this work? You know, it's all on paper now and we've designed it. And what's it actually going to look like when real people are in the room with it. This program was interesting, as sort of Beth had mentioned, where it sort of started small, and each year we kind of kept adding little pieces to it. So in that sense, I think we were lucky that we got to sort of build the program out without it being super overwhelming in the first year. If we tried to do what we did in 2019, the first year we did this program, it probably would have been a lot more challenging because we'd already learned from our mistakes on a lot of smaller programs that, we ironed out some of the bugs when things started out, that by the time we were trying to grow the program, we'd already worked some of those things out. The thing I think I want to start looking at, though, is how as we expanded the program, we kind of kept expanding our objectives too. And if you've been really trying to follow along, there's a lot of objectives involved in this program. There's a lot of things that we're trying to meet and a lot of goals we're trying to achieve. So how do we actually do this thing? Well, it's funny because I look at what this program looks like compared to some of our school programming. And our school programming, it looks kind of like this. And maybe this is oversimplified. I know a lot of you are probably involved in school programming could say like, well, but we do talk to the schools and well, we work with the state a little bit. But day in and day out, my educators, we spend most of our time working back and forth directly with the kids. We go to a school, we spend most of our time with the kids. We might talk to the principal for 5 minutes or a teacher for a minute here or there, or email a little bit ahead of time, but this is what we spend our day doing. This isn't the goal of the neighborhoods program, though. If we wanted to take a look at what this program is designed to do, it looks a little bit more like this spider web now. I like the idea that this programming we have is sort of centered around the kids, around the children to come. But here we don't just have my museum educators talking with kids. We have these events and we'll have 4 different educators on site. We'll have many stations set up around the room. Some of the stations are manned with an educator. Some might just be set up with a good set of directions on things people can try there. But here my educators are in a position to work with the kids, to talk with the parents that are with the kids. We're working with our community partners to make sure that they're getting out of this program what they want. We're seeing extended families. A lot of times aunts and uncles and grandparents and cousins will show up at these. So we're seeing a lot more of this students' connections to the world than if I was just seeing them in their classroom. In their classroom, I don't see their parents and their aunts and their uncles and where they spend their weekends at the community center. So it's a much more broad approach to who we get to work with. And then even the kids, it's interesting because in this setting, the kids can talk to each other. The parents can be talking to their kids. People from the community center can be talking with the parents at the same time their kids are involved with an activity. Or the parents and the kids can be involved in an activity together. Parents can be working with other parents. It's really kind of neat, the different layers that we try to bring to the program where it's so much interaction. That's the goal, is we have so much interaction going on. Now, how do we actually make that work? It's going to me, this is like, well, yes, this looks wonderful on paper, but how do we actually make, we can't make the people do anything that they don't want to do. So how do we make them want to do what we've sort of designed here? And I was jokingly talking with my colleagues here about this, about sneaking in the Pinewood Derby effect, which as far as I know, I just made that up. But the idea of disguised learning opportunities, this is one of my favorite little phrases. It's when basically I think that I've designed an activity where the kids think they're there to have fun and I think they're there to learn something. And at the end of the day, we both think that we're right. Nobody has to come to these programs. They're not paying for tickets to them. They're completely free to the community. So they could even register for them and not show up, and they're not out any, cash or anything like that. But we want them to come to the programs. So the only way we can do that, and this is what one of my notes I actually put in the PowerPoint. I said the activities, they have to be fun and engaging. No matter how good we think an activity might be, if it's not fun and engaging, the people aren't going to come back. I said, since the programs are informal and outside of a school setting, this is the only way to get and maintain participation. And this is important too, because sure, we could market these and make them sound really, really fun. And we could get people to come one time. But if they show up that one time and it's not really as much fun as they thought it was going to be, we will never see them again. And that's one of the metrics on this program, is that we want there to be ongoing involvement with the same families, the same students. We want them to come back to events over the course of the year and over the course of a summer. And this year I am actually seeing kids now that are remembering seeing me 3 years ago back at the library, back at the point of, we would have called it the pilot program back then. And they're still showing up this year. So to me, that's a huge success when I actually am seeing kids 3 years down the road. But that's where it has to be fun and engaging, or why would they ever come back for that long? And then the second point, I said, the activities are designed to try and engage the children and the parents together, with neither one of them simply being a spectator. Because that's sort of another, we could go to the library, we bring out an activity, we pass it out to the students, and the stereotype is the parents are standing in the back of the room on their phones or distracted. We're trying to design these in a way that the parents are going to want to be involved. And this is where I thought the Pinewood Derby came up. Because the Pinewood Derby, it's kind of funny, because I think everybody has that vision of, like, there's always the one parent who completely does the car, and it's amazing, and it's shiny, and it's polished, and everybody kind of knows, like, well, the parent did that car. And then there's probably one car that's a block of wood with a couple nails in it that barely rolls, and somebody goes, well, you see, little Billy, he made that car all by himself. That's not how the Pinewood Derby was ever really designed to be. It was designed to be an activity where a student or child and a parent would have to come together to work together to make this thing work, to sort of work together to achieve a goal. We're going to make a car, and it's going to roll as fast as we can make it roll. We have activities at the museum that for years we'll have, like, an engineering challenge activity, build the tallest tower, or build the strongest bridge, or design this ramp in such a way. And for years we'd been teaching these classes, and you pass out your materials to all the students, and you would almost have to chase away the parents and the chaperones. They'd be sitting there, and you turn for 1 second, and the next thing you had a parent building the most amazing towers, which were beautiful. But if the student was just watching their parent build a tower, at that point you were thinking, like, well, what do I have to do to fix this in the future? And I think I spent a few years really sort of wrestling in this, like, well, what do I do with these chaperones who are taking over and doing the activity for the student? When these neighborhoods programs came along, this was like a light bulb going off, where we said, that's what we need to harness. We need to look at those activities where the parents want to be working on the project with their student. And maybe that's not what we designed for a school program. That's not what we had in mind, and we didn't know the chaperone was going to be there. But these programs, one of the things that we set aside is that these aren't drop-off programs. The students are supposed to show up with family members. They're not supposed to just get dropped off at the library and picked up an hour later. So we needed to harness that energy that these parents bring to these things, where they want to do a thing with their student. And that's sort of where, that's where I like the Pinewood Derby comparison, because everybody's seen that one before. And it's an activity that's designed to sort of harness that student-parent connection and give them something to work on together. Now, this is about where I got to my slides, and I said, that sounds so fun. How do you make that happen? How do you explain to someone, like, what do I actually do when I sit down and design? Like, what's our day going to look like? So let me jump here. So I said, how do we accomplish this? Well, I threw in diversity, and that could mean so many different things in this setting. For the first one I just put in, we need a diverse staff. They have different backgrounds, they have different specialties. We have men, we have women, we have biologists, we have architects, we've had a geologist, we have all these people that bring different things. Why does that matter? It's because our participants have diverse interests. I might think that, animal programs are the best thing since ever. But if a student shows up and just thinks that, animals are kind of smelly and gross, but they love to build things, we have to harness that. Like, we have to have something else at that program for them to do, because they're not going to love every single possible thing we bring, no matter what we bring. I threw in here for diversity. I said, we're also trying to serve a wide age range, from pre-K through adult, because again, if the activities all look like, babyish activities, well, one, the adults might not be that excited about that. And two, like, the teenagers aren't going to show up and do something that looks like it's designed for preschoolers. So we might need to have something designed for preschoolers, because we might have a 10-year-old there that loves everything we have. They love the animals, they love all the STEM activities, but they brought a 3-year-old sibling with them. And if we don't have something at that event that engages those 3-year-olds, they're not going to be at that, the 10-year-old's not going to get to stay for very long if their 3-year-old is having a meltdown. So we've really got to have different things to grab the interest of all those different ages. Another way we can diversify things is we're always trying new things. Or sometimes we'll bring something old and try to do something different with it. And when you try new things, we probably rotate a couple new things in occasionally, not all at once, because some work better than others. We might get a new material and think, oh, this is going to be perfect. Like, we're going to set up a whole station around this. It's so clear how the directions work, and they're going to be able to do such a neat activity together, and their parents are going to get excited about it. It's great. And then we set it up for the weekend, and the station just gets destroyed. And we realize, like, oh, that material isn't going to hold up the way we thought it would. Or it just takes too much time. We're like one staff member spending their whole time cleaning it up. So we learn. And this is where the third year into our program, there's a lot of things we've realized this is great, and other things we've realized we just can't bring. They either get lost, or they roll away, or they break too easily. So we try new things, add different stuff, and see what works. This one I think is actually kind of important. I said, we accept that we cannot force families to participate in the way we imagine. So I'm picturing this activity where we have all these layers of interaction, and the adults are interacting with the adults and with their kids and with their extended families. If there's an activity station that's not working the way we want, we can always change that station around, but we can't really change what the people are doing. We have to sort of set them up for success with what we're putting out, and then hope it works. We can't kind of go around and tell them, like, you're doing this wrong. Let me show you how you're supposed to be interacting with your child. We can't do that. So we need to sort of put that opportunity there, and then hope that they're in a good position to take advantage of what we have provided. And it is a wide range of things. Since we've seen some of these families so many times, we do kind of keep trying to work in, different combinations of things, or even different challenges with the same material sometimes. So diversity, diversity, diversity. If we bring the same thing over and over and over again, even if it's great stuff, it's not going to be engaging if it's the same every time we work with the students. So the slightly shorter piece that I was going to work into is then we get into evaluation. And I have formal versus informal learning here, because my original background is from teaching at a middle school. And evaluation was so much more clear-cut. We gave quizzes, we gave tests, we gave homework, we graded them, we added them all up, and then we divided by 100, and we had an evaluation. Whether that's a perfect system or not is a conversation for another day, but it was a system. For informal learning, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, we get asked to evaluate much more abstract ideas, or much less quantitative ideas. I've been asked to evaluate, do you think these programs will increase the likelihood that these students will pursue a career in STEM? Well, that's a wonderful goal. How do you quantify that, though? Or, were the learners inspired by today's program? And I feel like that's sort of a classic. Like, well, how do you measure inspiration? And I guess my shorter answer to that is, well, we try our best. And I threw in a couple of examples here of what sorts of things we use when we are trying to evaluate these things quantitatively as best we can. So we ask parents, we stand between them and the door and say, before you leave, could you please, give us a quick little bit of feedback. Some of them spend more time on it than others. Some of them will circle some numbers. Some of them will give us comments down below. Most of the time, they don't fill that whole box up at the bottom, but we get feedback from them. We tabulate it up and say, hey, look, most of the people think we're doing something that looks pretty good. I would be worried if these numbers were much lower than that, really. I mean, these are supposed to be fun days. We get comments back from them. And one of the interesting things about these comments, these are definitely comments by the parents about what their kids thought. So they're all phrased sort of like, the kids had a great time. It was very engaging and the kids were happy. But we don't just ask the parents for their feedback. We ask the kids for their feedback too. And this is very interesting too, depending on how old they are. If the kids are closer to teens, we might even sneak them one of the adult feedback forms. I've been asked to get student feedback from preschoolers before, who obviously are not going to, fill out a survey, and they can't read the survey. I've literally had to read surveys with smiley faces on them and hold them up and say, like, so if you like today, circle the smiley face. And here, this one's a little bit sort of halfway in between. The words are there, so if their parent is, reading it to them, they can get some feedback. At the bottom, instead of saying, write me a paragraph, it says you can tell us in words or you can draw a picture. So if they want to draw a picture of a turtle, that gets the point across about what they enjoyed from the program that day. And then we tabulate that up, the same thing, and we sort of collect these comments. And sometimes we have real gems in there in terms of things that they've said to us that we're going, oh, this is what they're really liking, or this is the thing they're indifferent about. Personally, I just want to take the last comment on that page and just end on that note where one of the students said, I enjoyed the activities because we're doing stuff together. And I was like, oh, there we go. It's Families Learn Together in the Neighborhoods program. That was the whole goal. You know, we can give ourselves a pat on the back based on that comment there. Somebody thought we were doing what we set out to do. One other thing that I wanted to sneak in here is we sort of ran at the very beginning that we have all these partners we're working with. We survey them too, and we want to get feedback from them in terms of, are they happy with what they saw in the programs from their perspective? Because the librarian at the downtown library might have a different perspective on what their goals are for that program than a parent might. You know, the parent showed up and they thought their kid had fun. That's great. Is it meeting your partner's goals? And when I was putting this slide together, one thing I was thinking about is you really, if you are working with partners in any setting, in any of your institutions, you need to listen to them and listen to them. If there's a real problem that you're having with one of your partners, you don't want to hear about it in a feedback form like this. I want to say this feedback form is sort of a formality to help us quantify things that when, you know, we're trying to add up at the end of the year how this went, this gives us some quantitative data. This isn't where you want to find out from one of your main partners that they're not happy with what you're doing. You need to hear that from them a long time before and give them an opportunity to give you feedback about, you know, are you meeting their goals? Is this what they imagined when they, you know, set these things aside? So that was my my thought on working with partners is, yeah, you've got to keep your lines of communication open. All right, with that, I think we were going to sneak back to this slide where Joe is going to talk a little bit more about those partnerships.
Yeah, and Dan, just to build on what you said, I think it's important to look at your collaborators, not just as collaborators, but as part of a working staff together. When we had, and we learned this lesson a little bit the hard way, this is a little bit of a derivation of what I was going to talk about, but we had learned the hard way. We applied for a grant, particularly for this program, and they looked at, the funder looked at the partnerships that we had, and they were taken aback by the fact that we hadn't listed our partners as essential staff. And we hadn't thought to do that because they're not part of our staff. They're not on our, you know, they're not part of our staff role. But that mentality is something that is not only important when building the relationship and building the programs and bringing the programs out, but also getting the programs funded. You have to have that strong understanding that you're collaborating, you're all on the same team, and really, for all intents and purposes, those logos are just that, they're logos. You're all on the same staff. Now, the larger question is, any funder is going to ask for deliverables, and they absolutely should. Always be wary of a funder who doesn't ask for that. To that end, how do you quantify this success? And how do you measure education in these kind of informal settings? And what we did is we partnered up with Connecticut Children's Medical Center because they do have a background in trying to quantify what seems to be unquantifiable. They do have a program that is based on evaluation. They have an understanding of the community because they are such a part of a diverse community, that they have these programs and they have the staff that can help, that have helped us develop these evaluations and develop a strong understanding of how to utilize that data and how to utilize that as we move forward to building these relationships, but also building this program. And it's not the first collaborator you think of when this type of program comes up, but we've gone through now collaboration, diversity, and at the end of it, it's data. And you're going to have a data-driven project in order to justify its continuation. And that may seem a little bit stark and cold, but that data does feed into what you can showcase to your funders and what you can showcase to the community at large to show that, yes, this indeed works. Yes, this is something that people want and it's something that people need. And at the end of the day, you can look maybe 10, 12 years down the line to see, did this work? But I don't have that capacity yet, and I don't think anybody does. So you look at the data and you can sort of chart that. And that's where that particular collaborator came in. Every part of it is vital, and that's the recognition that is important, including those you may think you have nothing in common with, or you may think maybe too out there to collaborate with. So it's important just to remember that.
Okay. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Dan. We are open for questions at this point, and I do see that we have one question posed. Dan, I'm going to ask you this question. It's, please give us an example of an activity.
Sure. The first one that comes to mind is, because I already kind of touched on it, since we can't do something like the Pinewood Derby cars, we'll do ramp activities where we might bring a ramp along for the day. And we have Lego bins with Lego car parts in them, because you can't build a Pinewood Derby car in like 20 minutes, but you can build a Lego car in 20 minutes. And it might just be something as simple as, can they put together one of their cars as a team? And I kind of look at it as, now we have the family team instead of like a school team where you're trying to pair up students. Now you're basically trying to get like, mom and son to build the best little car they can. And then we have our ramp set up so they can, roll ramps down and test them until they decide they want to try something else. So that might be just like one station that's set up in one corner. That even might be a station that runs itself pretty well, versus if we have another station where people are pouring slime and running experiments on the slime that they're doing, where, we have some examples of things they can test, and they mix up their slime and then they can run their tests. We'll have things, I mentioned like engineering challenges. A lot of those make good sort of family collaborations. Anything you can build tall towers out of, anything you could try to build. Bridges is a little harder because you need a way to test them, but if you have a staff member that can work on testing bridges all day, you could have families trying to build strong bridges. Bridges, towers, cars, trying to think of a lot of the easy ones. Oh, and then we also have different materials for those things. If it's something for younger kids, it might be build the tallest tower you can with these giant wooden blocks. If it's teenagers, it might be build a really tall tower with this set of connects, or with this straw and 12 inches of tape. So there's some of the activities that are out there that they just need to be presented as, a family activity versus just something that they're going to do in school for 15 minutes. I hope that's sort of answering your question. I gave more than one, but engineering challenges in general are great. A lot of times those are ones that the parents will realize, oh, this looks kind of fun to jump into.
Thank you, Dan. We have another question that just came through, and the question is, how is the program operating during the pandemic? What changes have been made, and will there be an extension? So I will start to answer that question a bit. We did, when the pandemic and the closures first happened in March, we did go through a period of time where our educators were really trying to change focus from in-person learning to online virtual programs. And our partners were challenged. They were not sure what they were going to do. They were closed, their families were home, and their focus really was basic needs for those families. So we really geared up strongly in our virtual outreach for programs. Our educators worked hard on that. And by the end of the summer, I believe it was in August, Dan and his team began working back with the libraries again in a virtual fashion. And then after that, we have been since September or October, I believe it was, working back with the community centers in a virtual fashion. And we had to go back to our funders and propose a change to our original plan. I think that is key. We had to make sure we stayed in contact with them and explain to them what was happening and how we were approaching this. We recreated the budget to address this, to move things in an attempt to go virtual. There's no promise of that this is going to be successful. And I think one of the challenges we faced is one of the deliverables after getting into the community in their neighborhoods to work with them physically, and we could reach in through the computer that way, but how do we bring them out of that community when people are not making trips, when things are not open? And so that was one of the biggest changes. And we have a trial that we're about to launch this next month, is kind of a virtual tour, a very interactive virtual tour of our museum. It doesn't completely replicate that in-person experience, but it is an attempt to do that. Dan, I'm not sure if you want to say anything more about that.
I'll jump in for a minute on that one too, because Beth covered a lot of what we had to do. And it's interesting because I think the hardest part is, if you remember my pretty little diagram of all these different layers of interaction, I've kind of bemoaned that, like, that's the hardest thing to replicate once we've gone online. With Zoom here, it's the same thing today. There's only one microphone on at a time. So I can have one student talking, I can have one educator talking, but all those interactions, we lose so much. So that's my biggest loss. On the flip side of that, though, I think it has been so important that we've done it. Some of my students that have been coming back since this was a pilot program, I've managed to keep in touch with them. Like, is it as good as if I'd come out to see them in person in this summer? It's not, but I didn't lose touch with them. I still get to see these kids that I've been seeing, when they were 6 years old, when they were 7 years old, when they're 8 years old, now they're 9 years old. It would have been a shame to just completely lose touch with them for a year, lose touch with those families for that year, and then try to rebuild this, 18 months later and go, hey, we're back. So is it perfect? Nope. I think it's really important that we did it, though.
I do think keeping those connection with our stakeholders and our partners is also key.
Same thing.
Don't lose that momentum. That's key.
Agreed.
Okay.
I saw someone's hand went up in the chat.
It might have been me giving you a 5-minute warning.
Thank you, Meg.
You're welcome.
Mary Pelletier, is that?
Don't believe I see any other questions. Give it a second here to see if anything comes in.
One of the fun things, and while we're waiting to see if anybody else has a question, I could just talk to the fact that it's been neat having been at the museum through all the years that these programs have been developed, to sort of see all of those pieces come together over the years. I think that's a nice thing when we have a consistent staff. Our educators tend to stay for a very long time. Our current educators, most of them have been at the museum 4, 5, 6, 7 years. I've been there a little bit longer, but it's just the fact that every year we're not trying to create this from scratch with a brand new staff going, well, we learned all these things last year, except now I have a completely different staff to fix those problems this year. I think that's a wonderful thing if you have, long-term staff retention, that, we're kind of there to evolve with the program and sort of see it coming together. It'd be hard to just hand this off to somebody tomorrow and say, okay, you've seen my 1-hour NEMA description of the program, you can run it next year now. There's a lot of layers to it.
Well, and Dan, to that end too, it's the same with funders, is that you want to have consistent funders because it's a straight through storyline for them, and it's something that they can tout, as well as the basic achievements that the program actually has.
Yeah, it's something they want to continue to support versus looking for somebody new to fund it, which is kind of where the pilot programs were. We found like one funder that would fund it for 2 weeks, and great, we'll try it. But right after that, you're sort of back looking for who's going to support this idea next. So yeah, You're right. That's a good point.
Well, I want to thank everyone for being part of our presentation. I want to thank my co-presenters, and we hope everyone is having a wonderful time at the conference. Thank you very much.
Take care. Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Be safe.